Good afternoon, live from ZTN Studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. Welcome to the Leadership Talk Show. I'm your host, Andy Hodges. This broadcast is brought to you by Zim Papers TV network, ZTN, in partnership with the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Zimbabwe, ICAZ. Now, as usual, please feel free to share your comments and views via our Facebook page, Zim Papers TV network, or via our Twitter handle @ZTN News. Leadership is both a research area and a practical skill, encompassing the ability of an individual, group, or organization to lead, influence, or guide other individuals, teams, or in fact entire organizations. Zimbabwe is full of such leaders, yet one area of concern is that they may not pass on their leadership skills to future generations. Our guests will share their leadership stories so as to inspire the next generation of leaders. This is exactly what the Leadership Talk Show is all about. Our guest today on the Leadership Talk Show is a business and corporate leader. He is a well-known personality in Zimbabwe's corporate landscape, a chartered accountant and a member of the Institute of Bankers. He also completed the Barclays PLC leadership program in the United Kingdom, run with Duke University. He holds a Master of Business Leadership from the University of South Africa and a Bachelor of Accountancy Honours from the University of Zimbabwe. In his long and varied career, he has worked for organizations such as KPMG Chartered Accountants, TH Zimbabwe Limited, OM Asset Managers, now OMIG, Zimnat Lion Insurance Company Limited, SMM Holdings, Barclays Bank Zimbabwe, First Capital Bank Limited, and now in his current role. We welcome to the Leadership Talk Show this afternoon the Group Chief Executive Officer for Old Mutual Zimbabwe and Head of Banking Portfolio, Old Mutual West of Africa, Samuel Matsekete. Sam, welcome to the Leadership Talk Show.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andy.
It's a pleasure having you here. Sam, you have served in various roles with multiple organizations over your career, from banking to asset management, insurance, and you even worked for a roofing and piping materials company, TH Zimbabwe. Diverse companies indeed, if I may say so. Did this contribute in any way to your leadership journey to where you are now as Group Chief Executive Officer for Old Mutual Zimbabwe and Head of Banking Portfolio, Old Mutual West of Africa?
Certainly. I worked for a number of organizations, if you have already indicated, outlined. They're in different industries. And I think that makes me unique in my own career path. There would be similar stories, but the major benefit that I drew from this was just interacting with different environments, interacting with different cultures, different organizations, and the different industries always present different challenges. And the flexibility and the ability to adapt to each of those, I would say, is one of the skills that I then bring to bear in my current position or in my responsibilities whenever. So you could choose, as we would have traditionally seen, to be one that stays in a job the longest time, and it has its benefits and advantages. But the story of the different experience that you've outlined there for me has worked in my favor to be able to say I can relate, and bring to current situations the experience from the different industries.
I mean, you mentioned something interesting there. As you said, some people stay in an organization for 20 years and hopefully they get to the top. Others can move upwards, leadership positions moving upwards by joining different organizations. So both are the same. Both are equally as good. It depends on what suits you as an individual.
Certainly. And I think when you look at the way that, industry and commerce is evolving, just generally now, you would find that the trend is evolving to one where people seek to have, variety. We'll probably now have less careerists and people that are saying, I want to try new things. So when we used to look at careers spanning long, today I think that cycle is much shorter. And that helps, I suppose, to bring diversity of thinking when you belong to different teams.
It opens up your mind,
and opens up your mind and so forth. Yeah.
Now, Sam, your experience and expertise are anchored in the core fields of finance, banking, investment management, insurance, and risk management. I mean, you yourself state that your leadership skills have been developed from exposure at executive level, spanning a number of industries and within local and international organizations. Maybe you could just expand briefly on this.
So, in the early years of my career, when I did my articles, qualified as a chartered accountant, I faced the dilemma of, okay, so which industry do I want to join? And mentors would tell you, as long as you are a practitioner in finance, you can open the horizon as wide as you can. But you could also serve in other industries, mining and so forth. So if I just share with you briefly, just the way that career path evolved in the early years. So the main driver in the early years was, can I be responsible? Can I be in a place where I can influence, regardless of industry? So I went into manufacturing. And it was because of the opportunity, the change that was happening within that organization, and what it was presenting is what I thought unique experience. But I got to a time that I needed to define now, to say you can't continue to be generalist or just to follow opportunities. And I decided at that time that I will want to be in financial services. And I made that decision whilst I was still in the manufacturing sector.
A deliberate decision.
And I had to look for it. But I needed to define what financial services meant. And I realized that I could choose to be specialist, very narrow, and still be fine with it. But I broadly defined it at that time into financial services, which includes banking, insurance, advisory services, and so forth. Transactional, consultancy, and that's how I then defined it. I started to work towards some of the qualifications at that time that would get me into the sectors and the places that I saw I would build my career. And this is before I got into the career. So that's how, I then chose to say I want to be in financial services, and then equip myself for it ahead of the time.
So in a way, you're describing, I suppose, some leaders have said they don't have career plans, but in your case, you were very definitive. You said, I want to do that, and you went for it.
I was definitive, but I didn't start at that. I think earlier, obviously, it was just what was available, or where did I think the qualifications I had and the sort of experience I was looking for at that time, where would I get it more easily? But I would say I had to come up to a time that I had to make a plan and be definitive around my career plan.
Do you think that's important for budding leaders?
I think it's very important. I think it's important because in my mind, it gives you more control around what you want to be, but it also gives you the sense of fulfillment because you become purposeful. You also would have processed why you think you want to be in that industry. And I think it's not just the money, it's not the things that people might want to look at. You would have probably decided, as I did, that perhaps I will get to a position where I can influence the landscape of the financial systems, the markets, participate in the evolution of the financial systems in our own economy, because the skills that I had, the experience, the lessons that I had picked, a lot of them would have come from other, more developed economies. And I was saying most of this can actually also be brought here, and I want to be part of the story.
Okay.
So yes, I think that's what would have defined it.
Now, I went through the companies that you worked with over your career, but obviously there must have been highlights and milestones in your leadership journey. Maybe just pick a couple for us.
Sure. So I think some of the highlights, if you look at the journey, my highlights would have been the privilege, I want to call it a privilege, to be involved with situations of change, to be part of the change in the organizations that I was involved with, and to be leading some of it. So I'll give examples, at the THZ example that you mentioned, which is a manufacturing one. At the time that we were there was a real, overhaul of how the business was going to operate, it having been bought from Turner and Newell at the time, and it needed to reflect a new model and so forth. And being part of that story was great. I went into Old Mutual at the time, and at Old Mutual, it had just demutualized. And there was a project to set up the Old Mutual Asset Managers company. And I was part of the team, setting it up, putting the structures. And I remember celebrating getting license number 1 from the Reserve Bank.
For celebration.
Yeah, to say this is a milestone hit. Yeah. When I joined the TA group, at that time we got into transactions. We went into mergers, acquisitions of units of that we're being targeted, and being part of that, creating a new organization and forging a new way forward for a business that needed to regenerate itself. But the one that I would probably highlight is the transition at Barclays, where you would have seen an organization that was part of a global group, had its brand known globally, being bought and transforming and, getting into being part of a regional entity, bringing a new name to the market, and being at the helm of that organization with the sensitivities and all of the changes that needed to happen around it, and leading through that phase was one of the most fulfilling.
Going through your CV, I noticed that you rose as the companies you joined and so forth. But it on paper it looked easy, but I can't imagine it was. Was it an easy or difficult journey?
It had its challenges, to be honest, and I think that's where the fulfillment comes from. It would not have been something that you could say, I studied at school, and it's never like that. When you deal with real life situations, there is more, that you see and that you get to be involved with than you can imagine. In the example that I've just given you of, transitioning from Barclays into First Capital, you would have seen, the way that the customers would have responded needed to be managed, and there were sensitivities around that. Even as colleagues, the internal change, the cultural shifts that needed to be managed. You can't say, this is something I've seen somewhere, and I will just pull, plug and play.
But this is where your experience comes in.
And
all those different companies, all the different cultures. To be able to manage people, because that's one, this is the attributes of leadership, because these are important. In your opinion, what exactly are they?
Definitely. I think that's one of the things that you get to, have to accept as a leader. That leading means leading people. And leading means you are actually also having to harness what's within people. And you realize, and the sooner you do as a leader, that you are not a leader because you know everything, the better. So, and you can't claim to be everywhere, and you can't be everywhere every time. So you work through people, and you need people to deliver whatever it is that you set out to do.
So listening, how important is that?
Very important, and I think in today's leadership roles, it's even more critical. That's how you ensure that you're close to the pulse of things, because it's very easy to be very far, from where the reality is, far from the pulse. And when you lose that touch, you could think that you're still leading when you are having your own lonely walk in the path. You have no followers. So I think it is important to listen, and listening means, getting to actually hear, and to respond, and to ensure that you value what you hear.
You brought something up that's important there. As a leader, you must accept that you can't do everything, and that you must surround yourself with a team that can also criticize you, that can debate with you. Obviously you're the leader, so you make the final decision, but how important is that team, building that team around you as an effective leader?
Organizations are simple teams, and when we do that, we look at who has got what qualifications, who has got what skills, what expertise, what experience. And we also look at how do they complement each other, because we realize it's important for team members to complement so that the outcome from a team has the synergy of working as a team. But what you then find often is, and where we could get it wrong, is to then have this great team. It's there, you have brought them in for who they are, but you then deny them the opportunity to contribute. You deny them the place on the desk, on the table, but even if they are on the table, sometimes you actually don't give them the opportunity to contribute and really make meaningful contribution. I think that would be a tragedy.
Yeah.
So it really means that listening, but also involving, also recognizing that the team members can actually lead you some of the time, because they have what might be better than what you have for the task that you face at that particular time. And for me, I would say that's one of the things that I would want to cherish, and it has worked to continue to make members value. That's how they add value.
That's how they add value, yes. I want to talk about education because if I look at your background, as I said, it's in accounting. In fact, after your degree, you started serving articles of clerkship at KPMG, Chartered Accountants. There's this big debate about the relevance of education in today's world. People are talking about our youngsters now getting trained more for entrepreneurship and business, and really not so much focusing on formal type of education, lawyers, doctors, and so forth. But what advice would you give to our future leaders concerning education? How critical is it, in your opinion?
I think it would be a fallacy to imagine that education becomes irrelevant. Education remains, in my view, important. And I would say the minimum that education offers is the capacity to learn. You know, when you get into organizations, into business, even before we talk about leadership, one of the things that will always have to be part of you is to be able to learn and to continue to learn and unlearn, relearn sometimes. And that's how we adapt to changing environments, because new things will come up, new technology, new ways of seeing things. Customers' preferences change, they evolve. We need to respond as business. We can't do that without learning. So the minimum that education offers is creating the ability to learn. But beyond that, I think I see leadership or any role in a business comprising three elements. You know, there will always be the skills that you ought to have. If education helps bring out and perfect the skills,
like accounting, for example.
Like accounting, and I must say I appreciate my profession. So the skills is a vertical pillar that you ought to say, this is my leg, this is what I stand on. And for me, being an accountant, I'm proud to be an accountant, to be a part of the Chartered Accountant, a member of the Chartered Accountants Institute. Yeah, ICAS. And it's a pillar that I say works for me. I stand on it. But there are also other skills that you can then develop around this pillar. You have got to be able to relate with people, what I call the horizontal skills. Be able to relate with different environments. Be able to have the insights that make you succeed, which may not necessarily be outside your pillar. And then you always need what I would also call the diagonal skills. What helps you, you know, the value system and so forth.
I mean, people forget, of course, that, you know, when you're at school, you learn how to study hard, you learn how to meet deadlines, you learn how to deal with people. There's these soft skills, if I can call them that.
Exactly. Definitely. You know, these disciplines, we learn them more than what is actually the core curriculum. There's lots that we learn. You know, from an education environment. You learn, as you say, the resilience, the ability to, you know, work towards a deadline, to force your mind into a condition to say you have to assimilate this. And that makes the mind alert. You know, otherwise the alternative is just to be lazy. And when you're lazy,
and we don't want that. Yeah, because hard work is also critical for being a leader, isn't it?
Definitely.
Now, every successful journey, it always comes with failures. There's just no way around that. It's a fact. How did you and would you recommend that future leaders deal with this important issue of failure?
I think fail forward is how I would summarize it. So fail, you will. And if you want to draw any benefit from failure, is to realize what mistakes, what lessons, how can you avoid it? Because every occasion that you fail, I think brings lots and loads of learnings. I think that's the first thing. But the second thing is to say, allow yourself to fail, because I think it's in trying. You know, it's probably saying you're actually trying, you're pushing the frontiers. If you are finding yourself too comfortable and you are too shy, you know, to make different decisions, to chart new ways forward, then it is a problem in itself. But taking more risk, pushing the frontiers, will always come with some failure.
So the issue isn't failure. The issue is get up after it.
Get up after it, and learn from it, and continue to move forward.
You're watching the Leadership Talk Show. This broadcast is brought to you by Zim Paper's TV network ZTN in partnership with the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Zimbabwe, ICAS. Sam, you know, your journey, and most leaders I've spoken to, particularly here on Leadership Talk Show, you don't do your journey alone. You know, how important was the support of your family in terms of your leadership journey? That's number one. And also, how important is it for networking? I have a very, very funny story for you, which I'll tell you here on air. We interviewed Justin Bongoni on Leadership Talk Show, and he mentioned to us that you used to be his prefect at school, which I found quite interesting. So that's also networking. So family and also networking, the importance.
Very, very important. I think they anchored my pathway. If I start from childhood even, I mean, just to tell the story, my mom would say, you know, between meals, you must tell us what you've done that's productive. Don't have lunch after having breakfast and all you've done was sit around. So almost, you know, she inculcated in me a sense of saying, I must be productive. I must be seeking to add value. The world means you have to work. And you know, getting to know that working it can reward. And I'm not talking about jobs here. So a value system that says, regardless of whether you've got a job, wherever you are, you should be occupied, you must be working because that's the right thing to do. We are designed to be productive. But even when I look at my journey forward, I think the support to say, go for it, you know, explore, and the encouragement to say, yes, we may not agree that you are becoming an accountant because we thought you would have gone for medicine and so forth, but okay, we give you the chance. Right.
Because family, I mean, people forget, sometimes leaders, you need such a good family because they could be left behind or they could suffer because of it, isn't it? So they have to really have a buy-in to your leadership journey.
You definitely have to have that, and I'm most appreciative of the support that I get from even my children, my wife, to say you have the space. When you go out there, you feel supported that what you're doing is actually being appreciated. It may not be appreciated immediately by those that you work with, but I know the family will always appreciate almost sooner than everyone else, and that spurs you on.
Now, they always say that leaders are problem solvers and solution providers, and that's an important trait. We talked about listening, of course, you mentioned that earlier. But looking at Zimbabwe, okay, what do you consider to be the greatest challenge facing leaders today? In your opinion, how can or should these be navigated?
You know, because you mentioned Zimbabwe, which makes it a geographical, you know, question as well in terms of how we would be different from other geographies. I think one of the challenges we face in Zimbabwe as leaders might be, you know, some conditioning, you know, from how we have probably
always done things.
Being conditioned sometimes to just some of the hardships that we've gone through, and you feel that you're battered, you may actually fail to see things differently. You know, and I think it becomes a problem because that becomes a self-fulfilled prophecy. You think, oh, we now, you know, I can give you an example. Last year, when inflation started to go up, I think people immediately thought, okay, so this means we're back to 2008. And if you're not careful, you start to lead like you're in 2008. But this is 2021. And the landscape is different. The challenges might be similar, but they are different. And what we have seen evolve since that time actually tells us that if we had taken just the 2008 template and tried to use it, we would miss opportunities. There are a lot more things that are different now, things that are actually encouraging and value that's being created, which was not being created in 2008.
So this is about looking at your current environment with optimism.
With optimism.
Rather than pessimism.
Or being just open-minded and saying, you know, what else am I not seeing here? What are the potential blind spots? You know, because then if you don't do that, you lead like you're 20 years ago. And that's not good for an organization that's facing a future.
And now under COVID-19, of course, new technology. And if you thought back to how you used to be, you would reject new technology. Yet, however, it could work for your company or if you lead a position if you need to. Look at banking, for example. It's now digitalization, and that's the way of the future, fintech.
Exactly. So there's this saying that I love, which says, you know what, blessed are those that are flexible, for they shall not break. You know, because you're either flexible and you live on and you adapt, or you are stiff, you are rigid, and you just simply break and snap. So you're very right. And COVID-19 tested us on that front, and it's unimaginable, what the human mind can do when you're faced with a challenge, which is really the mother of invention.
Now, we are coming to the end of this very interesting discussion on your leadership journey, but I want to ask you two very important questions. First one, what would you consider the most important attributes that future leaders should focus on or have? And I suppose answer that one first. And the second one, of course, is you've had this long leadership journey, how would you like to look back and say, that is what I was remembered for?
Sure. I think as leaders, I would encourage all of us to listen and listen more, be close to the action. What we used to learn in textbooks, where you could plan for a 5-year horizon, life was almost linear. It's almost like you aimed to achieve some state and it becomes steady state beyond that. And you could even imagine a world where things are on autopilot. Those times are gone. Today, there is a lot more demand on leadership skills and being able to adapt, because change is much faster. And where we used to think about horizons of 10 years, I'm in the investments industry myself, people are no longer looking that long. So what we used to define as long term then is now different. Today, people want things to happen faster. And I think that's the challenge, to be able to
And you also have to adapt to the existing marketplace, don't you? It could change from week to week, even in some cases.
Exactly. It could change from week to week. It could change very fast. And so is the competitive landscape, because there's a lot more there that we thought we could make proprietary, but cannot be proprietary. And there's change that just happens. If you're not careful, it will happen on you. You will not
get
realize.
Left behind.
And
Legacy.
Left behind.
So, Sam, what do you say when you look back? That is what I would like to be.
If I can be remembered for having played some role in terms of shaping our industry in the financial services, that's small way that I can. But most importantly, being remembered for inculcating a way of doing things, which is to do things right. And doing things right, in my mind, I think is much, much more fulfilling.
Because I know we have a quick break, but corporate governance is critical. For anyone who's coming up, do things properly, do things right, obey the law. I mean, these are simple things, but a lot of people disregard them.
Exactly. They are simple things. People disregard them, and the alternatives are worse, even when you look at the ways things shape up in a macroeconomy, for example. So if I could add some value to say, this is how things used to be done, but through influence, through my small space, I contributed to things being done in a certain way, which contributes to being done in the right way.
I think on that note, we have come to the end of our program this afternoon. You've been watching the Leadership Talk Show. This broadcast is brought to you by Zim Papers TV network ZTN in partnership with the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Zimbabwe, ICAZ. I'd like to thank our guests today, the Group Chief Executive Officer for Old Mutual Zimbabwe and Head of Banking Portfolio, Old Mutual West of Africa, Samuel Matsekete. Samuel, thank you very much for appearing on Leadership Talk Show.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy.
Well, that's it from us for this afternoon. Join us every week for the Leadership Talk Show. That's every Tuesday at 2 p.m. live on Zim Papers TV network ZTN. A final thought. The first responsibility of a leader is to define reality. The last is to say thank you. In between, the leader is a servant. That's from Max Dupree. I'm Andy Hodges. Goodbye, and please, you all be safe.